Hello and welcome. This is a review of the Slaughter Act 1. First off, full disclosure, I received a key from the developer to do this review. However, I am under no obligations from him as to its content. The Slaughter is a noir point-and-click adventure game from Brainchild, which is a one-man team I might add, so that's impressive. It's reminiscent of old adventure games like Monkey Island or Full Throttle, and more recently, it reminds me of the Blackwell legacy, which also took inspiration from those classics. In the Slaughter, you play as Sydney Emerson, a down on his luck, behind on his rent detective. And really, is there any other kind? Living in London in the East End in 1880. The story opens with Sydney on his side in a dark alley being beaten by a large man named Salas and his diminutive employer, Charlie Finch. You luck your way out of that situation and you soon find a case to work on. There's a serial killer roaming the streets, and a client is paying you for your private detective services. First off, let's talk about sound and visuals. The Slaughter doesn't have voice acting, and the sound effects are reminiscent of an old adventure game, as is its pixelated aesthetic. This may not be to everyone's taste. Personally, I have some strong nostalgia to those old adventure games, and I just think this game looks good in general. The animations look nice, and the characters and locations are well detailed, with foreground and background objects and characters easily distinguishable. It's a nice looking game. It doesn't have voice acting, but that didn't hurt the experience for me. The writing for the Slaughter is definitely a high point. For a noir game about a serial killer and murder, there's plenty of humor and lightheartedness, like Sydney falling on his bum, or the barman quipping at you when you examine his liquor behind the bar. The characters all have a lot of personality, and it clearly comes across while interacting with them. Sydney himself has a lot of noir elements to him, like a pulpy, down-on-his-luck detective would, but things don't get too dreary, and his dialogue is filled with humor and wit. Music is another strong suit. The different locations around London each have their own music or ambient sound playing, from a more upbeat song at the pub to the eerie crow squawk and ambient city noise of the dreary area in front of the pub. Like most adventure games, the Slaughter is mouse-driven. You control your character by clicking around the screens and interacting with hotspots as you mouse over them. The left mouse button is your interact or talk button, and your right being examine. Outside, you move between areas by clicking on a hotspot or the edge of the screen, which will bring you to a map that allows you to traverse to other areas in London. Double-clicking at the edge of the screen or on a doorway will instantly move you to the new location. Sydney has a rather slow walking speed, and it would be nice if you could make him run by double-clicking around the area, like is done in some other adventure games. This is a minor nitpick though, as the areas are rather small, so it isn't a huge issue. The inventory is located at the bottom of the screen, and mousing over it expands it to show the objects you're holding. You can use objects from your inventory by clicking and dragging them onto a hotspot, or combining objects in your inventory in a likewise manner, like in most adventure games. You can also examine objects in your inventory, and it's a good idea to do so when you get something new. Another minor nitpick, and this is not a problem in most areas, but the position of your inventory at the bottom of the screen is slightly annoying in some areas when you're moving from north to south, as you expand the inventory by accident instead of moving Sydney. Most screens are oriented east to west, so it is an issue in all areas. This being an adventure game, you solve puzzles by using objects on things and people, and also by talking to people and running through their dialogue. You often have multiple places to go and multiple things to interact with, but the puzzles are logical, and it will be fairly obvious what you need to interact with, or do to move the story forward. This isn't a game where you need to be using everything with everything. This is a welcome change compared to those old adventure games and some newer ones where you had dozens of places to explore at a time and multiple pages of inventory items. There's also a minigame you play partway through where you shove pennies across the board, called Shove a Penny, that nicely changes things up. Also, if you hate it, or suck at it, like I did, you won't have to play it a million times to get past that obstacle. My two major complaints about the slaughter are to do with the pace and the ending. So let's talk about the pace first. So the pace is more than a little uneven. There are these symbolic dream sequences where you're in a room with a fish, and I feel it breaks up the flow of the game without adding a whole lot. I found myself just wanting to get through them to see where the story is going. In their defense, though, they are rather short and don't take long to go through. Later dream sequences are much better done. Also, when you finally return to your apartment after an exciting prologue, you get a rather boring job to do. It works in setting up where Sydney is in his life, but it feels like filler, something to break up the game before the real meat of the story begins. The other complaint I have is that this act ends on a rather lame cliche that pulled me out of a story I was otherwise engaged in. I don't enjoy seeing the puppet strings, and they were in full view for that ending, and leaves me with some misgivings about how the story will shape up. With that said though, this may not be much of an issue depending on how subsequent acts shape up. I think there's only 3 acts in total, but I could be wrong, and I'll update this video's description or with an annotation if I am indeed wrong. It took me 4 hours to finish the slaughter, but I'm a player that stops to smell the roses, so 3 to 3.5 hours to see you through to the end. This is the first act of the game, so much is dependent on where the subsequent acts take the story and its characters. But all in all, I enjoyed the slaughter and enjoy spending time with these characters. I have some misgivings about the game's pacing and ending, along with some nitpicks here and there, but overall it was an enjoyable experience and I look forward to seeing how the story plays out. The Slaughter Act 1 is out tomorrow, January 28th on Steam, and is $8.99 in US dollars, and also available through the Brainchild website. I have a link to both in the description. Thanks for tuning in for this review. If you enjoyed this video, check out the other content I've done on my channel, or chat with me on Twitter. Thanks for watching, and see you later. Last 2 times. And pyrison. So if this doesn't do a shitload of damage to her right away, I don't know what will. Can't lock onto her. So she's gonna barf on me now. Yeah? Hitting her in the bum. I'm afraid to use my flame power. Oh, gotta get away from her head. She's almost dead. There she goes.